I had my numbers crossed up, and I think I might have announced it Wednesday night. I kept saying that children of Israel ate manna for 40 years while they were in the wilderness, and I said it's found in Exodus 35:16 or 38:16. I have my numbers reverse read. It's Exodus 16:35 here. So I have my numbers backwards. That's why I couldn't find it. Number 16, Exodus 16:35 says, "And the children of Israel did eat manna 40 years until they came to the land they inhabited. They did eat manna until they came unto the borders of the land of Canaan." Now you're going to see something significant about that in Deuteronomy chapter 12. What he's talking about here, and I'll go back to these discourses in just a minute, is what's going to transpire when they get over into the land of Canaan. They are no longer going to be a wandering people, okay? They're going to be stationary in their own land and in their own places. Something else that we notice too, to help them in their worship practices, we find that the Levites are going to be dispersed throughout those lands, okay, through those tribes of the children of Israel, primarily to help them function in the role of worship. I know back when we went through the book of Leviticus and Numbers, if you remember, there was like 7 Jewish feasts that was prominent in their society, okay? Well, we're going to find 3 of them required that the males that were able-bodied, if you were able to go to Jerusalem, you were to go there and bring your offering and your tithes and things of that nature. The first couple of these feasts is found in the spring, and somewhere around what we call March, April, in our language, is the first fruits feast is given there. The Passover is done. The Feast of Weeks is done, and that's the first 2 they attended, okay? Now, the last one that they were required to attend was the Feast of Tabernacles. You find that occurred as the last harvest was coming in, somewhere around our September and October, okay? But there were other feasts, as we know, they kept throughout the year, and it also involves their feasting in their homes also. So anyway, that's what chapter 12 basically consists of, about these feasts, about what they could eat and could not eat. That's why we went to chapter 14. We find that in chapter 14, the requirements of them eating when they get into the promised land is going to open up a little bit. Now, that's in their common meal, okay? In their worship and sacrifices, it had to stay the same, okay? So he talked about that, and we talked about that. In Deuteronomy chapter 12, you get down there to around verse 15 or so, you're going to find that he talks about clean and unclean. Well, what he's talking about here is when you have your common meal, like we eat a common meal, it don't matter if you are ceremonially clean or unclean, okay? In other words, it doesn't matter if you go there and start eating and your hands not washed if it's a common meal. But now if it's a ceremonial meal, you had to be cleansed, okay? So you're starting to see a little more emphasis and maybe a little bit of, I don't know if I want to use the term ease up on this, because they're not going to be a stationary people and not a wandering people, okay? And we talked about that, about the ceremonial unclean and being clean. Over in, I guess I'll go ahead and flip over there while I'm here in chapter 14. It kind of makes it a little bit clearer of what Jesus was encountering with these people, okay, about what they were doing and their practices, okay? Turn with me to Mark chapter 7, for example. You know, when Jesus was here dealing with them Jews, one of the things that they got after Jesus about was his disciples doing what? Eating with unwashed hands. Okay? So they're talking about here a common meal. Notice what it says here. Then came together unto him the Pharisees and certain of the scribes which came from Jerusalem. And when they saw some of the disciples eat bread with defiled, this is to say, with unwashed hands, they found fault. Well, now, you can start to see what Jesus is encountering here. Was that a problem with the law, or was that a problem with their tradition? Okay? Eating common foods. Okay? All right, notice what he says here. So actually, when you look at Deuteronomy 12 and 14, I wish they had tied them together and when they're done the book, chapter, and verses, because we've got to get through 13, and then we'll go back into 14. But anyway, notice what he says here. For the Pharisees and all the Jews, except they wash their hands often, eat not, holding a tradition of Moses. Doesn't say that, does it? Whose tradition did it say? Of the elders. Notice what Jesus said. And when they come from the market, except they wash, they eat not, even when they went out in public. They felt like they were getting contaminated even when they went to the marketplace, okay? Go to the grocery store, well, I guess would be in our terminology today, okay? They would wash before they, and we're not here saying that it's not a good hygienic practice to wash your hands, okay? It is, isn't it? Whether you're ceremonially clean or unclean, it's just a good practice. But in reality, if you've ever worked on a farm, sometimes the best you can do, depending upon how far back you in the field and what you got available, sometimes all you can do is, okay? Well, nothing wrong with me eating a sandwich with my hands dirty. That's kind of on me, isn't it, Jeff? And I think a lot of us have done that, not because we wanted to, but it was just the situation at hand, okay? So we find that Jesus encountered this. Notice what he says. Well, not what he says here. And when they come from the marketplace, except they wash, they eat not. And many other things there be which they have received to hold, as the washing of cups, pots, brazen vessels, of tables. Then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, why walk not the disciples according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? Now they're looking at a common meal here, okay? And he answered and said, well hath said Isaiah prophesied of you, here hypocrites, that is written, their people honored me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Howbeit in vain they do worship me, teaching for the doctrines and commandments of men. For laying aside the commandments of God, ye hold to traditions of men. Notice what they had done now. Laying aside the commandments of God. Now this is Jesus talking to them. Who gave this to Moses in the Old Testament? Well, he did, didn't he? He wrote it. He don't know what it said, right? Okay? For laying aside the commandments of God, ye hold the traditions of men, has the washing of pots and cups, and many other such things like things you do. So he's putting it back on them. God never required that. God is all to give them this law. When you get over into the promised land, some of the conditions that you're having to live under because of where you're going to be and the location you're going to be at, there's just some things that's not going to be feasible, okay? And I guess while I'm at it, Greg, since I'm in chapter 14, one of the things that you're going to find that's going to happen, and he talks about all this. Now, it's a pretty lengthy study that you have to get into on this to see the big picture, and I'll show you how this works in just a minute, okay? What's fixing to happen is, because they're going to be dispersed, and they're going to have their own locations, they're going to be in a non-wandering environment, they're going to be in a stable situation. God is going to allow them in Deuteronomy chapter 14, when you go to Jerusalem to one of these feasts, you don't have to bring your sacrifices with you. You don't have to bring your grain, and you don't have to bring your animals and stuff because of the distances you're going to travel. Remember, when they were wandering in the wilderness, what happened, you had the tabernacle as the center point, and you had the tribes lined up like this. Okay? So, as far as being in a location to worship, you were fairly accessible to it. Well, now we're going to find when they get over into the promised land, he's going to tell them that the place the Lord shall choose is where you're going to worship. Okay? So let's look at Deuteronomy chapter, and we went through all this last week. I guess I'm trying to do a quick summation here. Okay? I'm going to begin reading in verse 22 or 14. Thou shalt truly tie all the increase of thy seed, the field bringeth forth year by year. And thou shalt eat before the Lord in the place which he shall choose, choose to place his name. Now you got to remember what's going on here too. The temple is that we know of, and when we associate the Jewish custom, we associate it with the Jewish temple in Jerusalem in AD 70. You're a long way from that. There's a whole lot of water, Jeff, going to go on the bridge before we get there, okay? You're hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years away from that, okay? So the Jewish temple is not thought about here, and we're going to see that there was locations God had chose for them to worship. It had moved 3 times in its history, okay? One place was, anyway, I won't get into all that just yet, okay? But that's where they had to go, okay, to worship God. So, but what about the distances that you were going to be? Notice what it says in verse 24. And if the way be too long for thee, so that thou art not able to carry it, or the place be too far from thee, which the Lord you shall choose, which the Lord thy God choose to set his name there, when the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, thou then shalt turn it into money. Now watch this. And bind up the money in thy hand, and thou shalt go unto the place which the Lord thy God chooses. What did he say? Remember now, they're going to be in a fixed location, each tribe. No longer wandering. The temple the tabernacle is not going to have its availability like it had, okay? Some are going to be way up in the north, some are going to be way in the south, okay? So what's God doing? In his wisdom, he's making provision so they can still worship him, okay? And this is what Jesus encountered there. It kind of makes it a little clearer when you look at what the law of Moses said, like washing of hands. Okay, that was of the Jews. God said it didn't make no difference when you wash eat your common meal clean or unclean. Okay? Ceremonial, though, when you did your worship, what were you supposed to be? Clean. Okay? Pretty simple when you stop and think about it. It's just a lot of times I think our mindset centers too much on the temple in these things. Well, when you got to the temple, we're a long way from the temple. Okay? If you look at the first temple, based on if this was written somewhere around 1440, 1450 BC, you go on up, you're probably 600 years, 700 years before the first temple was ever even built. I'm not even talking about the temple that was destroyed in AD 70. That was going to be another 600 years in the future. Okay? So how did they worship? How did God make provision for them to worship? Okay? Notice what he says here. You can turn, you don't have to bring those cattle and that grain and all that. You don't have to bring that with you. You can turn it into money. You can sell it at home. Bring your money with you. Notice what it says here. And thou shalt bestow that money for whatsoever thy soul lusteth after. Now, what he's talking about here, lusting after, this desire for meat. It's not talking about sinning. It's talking about desire here, okay? Read sometimes we may desire to eat some catfish over some fried chicken, right? We get a craving for it, don't we? Well, that's okay? But it falls under certain parameters. For the oxen, or for sheep, or for wine, or for strong drink, or whatsoever thy soul desire, thou shalt eat there before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt rejoice in thy household. So he says that when you get to that place of worship, what can you do with the money? Well, you got to eat, haven't you? A normal meal, haven't you? Okay? But also, what about your sacrificing? Okay? So it's okay to turn it into money if you live a long distance and you get to where you're going, you take that money and you turn it in for your needs, both for what you're going to eat and what you're going to sacrifice, okay? Thereby, that leads us up into a clearer picture, maybe, of what was going on in Matthew 12 through 13. Let's start there. See where I'm at. Let's try John 2:13 through 16. I got so many notes here till I thought I had separated them out before I got here, but sometimes when you get a little age, you don't quite work that way. Anyway, so here we have the Jews at Passover in John chapter 2. And the Jews' Passover was at hand, and Jesus went up to the temple at Jerusalem. Now we're in where usually our mind settles at the temple in Jerusalem, okay? This is a temple that's going to be destroyed in AD 70. This over here was written in 1451 BC, okay? Somewhere along about this. So see how much time has done passed? Did God allow them to take money with them to purchase if they live great distances? Yeah. Okay, he's already said that's okay. But notice what's happened here. And in the temple, notice where he found them. Inside the temple gates, on the temple grounds, if you will. Okay? And maybe someone was even inside the temple. That's what it says. And found in the temple those that sold oxen and sheep and doves and changers of money. And when he had made a scourge of small cords, he drove them all out of the temple, the sheep, the oxen, and poured out the money changers and overthrew the table. And he said unto them, take these things hence, make not my Father's house a house of merchandise. And his disciples remember that it's written, the zeal of thine house has eaten me up. So what was the problem here? They had taken it and had made merchandise out of it, okay? Now, when you take it and make merchandise out of it, what's the only thing driving you?
Profit.
Anything wrong with them, God said, taking money with them and purchasing these animals and stuff? Looks like they had even polluted the temple with it. Looked like it was a bare minimum inside the gate. And I'm not going to tell you some of them weren't even inside there because it said he took the temple curtain cords, didn't he? Okay? So what had they done? They had apostatized what God had said. God didn't say you couldn't take money with you. God didn't say you couldn't buy your oxen and your sheep and whatever grain that you needed for both your sacrifice and your common meat. So who corrupted it again, Daniel? The Pharisees, the Jews. They had corrupted the plan. So when you go back and you look at some of this and you look at what Jesus had encountered, kind of makes it a little clearer what's happening, right? Okay? About the washing of hands and about these animals being in the temple and the temple grounds and all that kind of thing. So it kind of clears it up a little bit that, they wasn't paying any attention to what God's word was it? See, God had made a provision for them when they became a people that were settled in a land. Okay? So they could still carry out their worship functions. Okay? So, anyway, I probably spent more time on that because we need to finish up. And there's more to it than just that. Like I say, we had a very lengthy discussion last week on this. So it's kind of an interesting chapter, Jeff.
Another thing to think of is when they were selling that in the temples, they probably weren't undefective animals and such.
That's a good point.
Well,
Yeah, because like Ryan said, it had turned to what? A business. In a way, do we see that in some, and I'm just going to use a generic term here, do we see that in Christendom today in some places where the church is a profit-making organization? Yeah. Well, who done that? God or man? It's the same thing. Okay, God's made provision. They didn't adhere to the provision, okay? They had corrupted it, so. Anyway, and two, remember this. Remember what he told them back in Deuteronomy chapter 12 when these things were going to happen. He told them, listen, I'm going to begin in verse 8. Ye shall not do after all the things that we do here this day every man whatever is right in his own eyes. So where is he talking to them at? They haven't went into the promised land yet. They're still outside. They're still in the wilderness. They have come up to the promised land. They have not gone over into the promised land, Greg. Notice what he says here. For ye are not as yet come to the rest and to the inheritance which the Lord your God giveth you. They weren't in there yet, were they? Okay? But when we go over Jordan and dwell in that land which the Lord giveth you, to inherit, he giveth you rest from your enemies, you dwell in safety, and all those places, okay? And then he starts into this other. So all of this wasn't going to take effect to when here? When they went over into the promised land, okay? So God has made a lot of provisions for these people to still continue to worship him. So anyway, I'm going to pull back on that. I spent a lot more time on it than I thought I would this morning. I was trying to base it on some simple notes I had. A lot more to it than that. And like I say, we talked about that. It was real interesting. Like I say, chapter 14 really clears up chapter 12. And I say that to say this. Verses 22-28 has to do with expansion and meat consumption. As the Lord expanded their territories, if they desire to eat meat in the designated place of worship is too far, they can slaughter and eat as instructed, but offerings must still be taken to the designated places. Remember something else that's going to happen here. The Levites are going to be stationed in each part of the land to help them do this. There's going to be 3 feasts that the males are going to go to in the spring and one in the fall, okay? So the rest of it, they're going to be there to help. Now, we'll keep talking about the discourses of Deuteronomy, okay? And we talked about there's only 4 discourses within it. Here's how this falls, okay? It's kind of like reading an agreement or contract. You can't just read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs and say, oh, that's how it is, and then you go over and a few more paragraphs, and it's like more detail about what's expected, okay? Same way with this. Like I say, chapter 14 explains chapter 12. Chapter 16 explains about the 3 feasts, okay? So you have to take a package of this and look at it, okay? Chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 4, verse 43 is Moses' first discourse that he gave, okay? The second discourse, chapter 4, verse 44 through 26:19. So we're going to have what? 19, 20, 21, nearly 22 chapters dealing with the core of what's expected of them. This is one discourse, okay? So you have to take the whole discourse and look at the whole picture. You can't just take one verse and let your imagination run away with it. Chapter 27, verse 1 through chapter 30, verse 20 is Moses' third discourse. Chapter 31, verse 1 through chapter 34 and verse 12 is Moses' final words and death, okay? So you see how this is laid out, okay? Man done the book, chapter, and verses. We know originally it was all just one flow, wasn't it, okay? And, maybe in some of this it would be good to have notations that structured out for you so you won't just take one chapter and then, well, wait a minute, this chapter's contradicting this chapter. Well, no, it's not. It's all one discourse, okay? Like signing a contract. You get a 5 or 6 page contract in fine print, it's going to take you a little while to read it, but it behooves you to at least look over it real good, doesn't it? So you get the full picture of what he's trying to do. And Daniel, it's just like when we went through the book of Leviticus and all that. I believe they done it, but I would like to see the mechanics of that played out, wouldn't you? It would be just like with it would be real interesting to see the mechanics of how they applied this, It's like a lot of things. We have it, we know they done it, God instructed them to do it. You got a hammer and I want to see you use it. Okay? That would really help clear things up. Any comments on that? I want to refer back to chapter 14, okay? you're gonna get into chapter 14 that they're to give a 10th part every year of what they have, okay? As an offering. Now, every third year, that 10th part's gonna be given to the widows and the orphans and the poor and all like that. That's a whole different thing. But are you expected to take the 10th part of your crop and your animals and all to the place of worship that God's gonna designate it? If you're in a stable location, if you're in a fixed location. No, you could, you could factor it out, Greg, into whatever the money value would be. Worship to be done at the designated place by the Lord. If too far and not able to carry it, it's covered in verse 24, and we just talked about that. Turn it into money, and we just talked about that, and we looked at a couple of passages of Scripture where Jesus encountered a problem with the way they were mechanically applying that. Ryan, I guess that would be a way to say it, okay? It was problematic the way they were doing it, okay? And used to purchase items for sacrifice or a common meal, okay? Verse 26. So you see how this thing unfolds. It's kind of, you kind of got to let the discourse explain itself. And one of the things you see too, always include the Levites in what you're doing. Why? They didn't receive a land inheritance. As we showed last week, the Levites were going to be dispersed into every tribe in their stationary location. They were actually going to have what it referred to as their own cities. When you look at that, more their own dwellings within this so they could be taken care of. So you're going to have that going on too. So that's why you always want to remember the Levites is going to be dispersed among you. Oh, before I get to the idle part of it, I thought somebody might would have caught what it said here in verse 26. Not only can you purchase wine, but you can purchase strong drink. Jeff, I guess they can get drunk while they're there, right? No, God never sanctioned the use of strong drink to be intoxicated, okay? And when I think about that, I want to say it was my Jehovah's Witness friend, Dave. He used to like to go back over there because some of the Jehovah's Witnesses teach it's okay to social drink. You find that even in the church, okay? I worked with a lady that was member of one of the large churches of Christ there in Montgomery, and we had a good conversation about that. As long as it wasn't intoxicating, it was okay to have a couple of drinks socially, okay? But anyway, so what's they talking about here? Did they have medicine like we did today? Did you know by volume, NyQuil? And I haven't checked it today. I did look several years ago. NyQuil contains 10% alcohol by volume.
So does Listerine.
Yep. Medicinal or getting drunk? It's medicinal, isn't it? That's what they had. They didn't have like we have today, okay? So it had nothing to do with that. Okay? It had to do with medicinal purpose. They traveling, right? If you out traveling, you subject to get sick. Yeah. So you really can't use any of this to promote drunkenness, can you? Because God never sanctioned drunkenness, did he? Okay? It's just like the writer of Proverbs said that you give strong drink to a dying man. What's he talking about? Well, it's comfort. It's a sedative. You use it for medicinal purposes, is all he's saying. Okay, I remember as a kid growing up, Mama used to mix up and used to keep just a little bit of whiskey at the house, okay? And when we get the old croupy cough and stuff like that, we'd go to the doctor and we'd get a shot and we'd get medicine. Well, she'd go in there and get a little glass, pour a little bit of that in there, put a little peppermint in it, drop a little lemon juice in it. Some of the best cough medicine you've ever had, okay? So, were we using it to get drunk, or were we using it for medicinal purposes? Well, back when they come along, especially back during the Depression, doctors and medicines was scarce, wasn't it? So you had to use what you had, didn't you? Yeah. So anyway, I took some triage training many moons ago, and it was real interesting at some of the things that you can use household in the event of an emergency. That work real well, until you can get medical attention. So anyway, that's another story. Okay, any comments or questions on that? There's a lot to that, okay? These couple of chapters have a whole lot of things that's going on there. And of course, verses 29 through 31, warning against idolatry. The Israelites are warned not to be ensnared by the practice of nations they drive out and must not inquire about or adopt their way of worship. Now that's interesting. We know it always talked about adopting and getting involved. Don't you even ask about it. Don't you even inquire about it. Okay? Stay away from it. Okay? I was reading, a Mormon friend of mine had given me the Book of Mormon years and years ago. And I sat there and trying to read it. It's not very well written, but anyway, trying to read it. And Peggy walked, "What are you reading?" I said, "Well, Greg gave me this here Book of Mormon. I'm trying to figure out what's going on." And she told me, she said, "You better put that thing down. That stuff will get in your heart and mind." And I think that was a good point, you know? You have to be careful about some of this stuff, don't you? Because it will influence you. So don't even inquire about it. Of course, I was trying to do it to learn more about what he was saying, although I never did find out the star that God lives on, Greg, and he never brought me the star chart where the star is located that God physically lives on, okay? That's how strange it is, okay? And it gets worse the deeper you get in it, okay? So anyway. Verse 32, they are to keep obedience to God's commands. Moses concludes with an admonition to obey all that God has commanded without adding or subtracting from it. Teaching points. Centralized worship. God commands the Israelites to destroy all places where the nations they are disposing worship their gods. This underscores the importance of worshiping God in the place He chooses, emphasizing unity and purity in worship. Exclusive worship. The Israelites are instructed not to worship the Lord in the way the other nations worship their gods. This highlights the need for distinctiveness in worship, setting God's people apart from the surrounding cultures. And you know, that's one thing we're supposed to be, a set apart and distinctive people, aren't we? What did Peter say? We're a holy nation, a peculiar people. That's what we're supposed to be. If we look just like the world, then guess what we are? Okay? Joyful worship. God desires that His people rejoice in His presence, bringing their offerings and celebrations with their families. Worship is not just a duty, but a joyful expression of gratitude and community. Obedience in worship. The chapter repeatedly emphasized the importance of doing what is right in the eyes of the Lord. Obedience to God's commands is central to true worship. And avoiding idols, the Israelites are warned not to inquire about the gods of other nations or adopt their practices. This serves as a caution against syncretism and the subtle allure of idolatry. And that's the end of that. So, there's no comments or anything on 12. I'm going to jump on into 13 and cover it. We'll probably start on it, then we'll jump back into 14. Not going to spend a lot of time in 14 because we've already covered pretty much what it's doing, but we will hit the high points in there to better explain chapter 12. So, there's a lot to that old system. Why would you want to go back? Why would people even entertain wanting to go back to the old system? I know one part of premillennialism, I think we might have talked about it here in a lesson a couple of years ago. One avenue of premillennialism teaches that when Jesus comes back to this earth and sets up His earthly kingdom, the old Jewish temple is going to be rebuilt and animal sacrifices is going to start taking place again. Do you know what you're asking for? I mean, you know, Deuteronomy chapter 13. What's the conversation going to be like? Enticers to idolatry stoned, without regard to nearest relation. Wow. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how related you are to that idolatry. Guess what they did? So you want to go back to the old law? You know, Paul told the church of Galatia that you're in debt to whatever it is you take a hold of. He said if you're trying to practice the old law, you're indebted to the whole law. You can't just pick and choose. Okay? You know? But even at best, you've fallen from grace, he says. Okay? Idolatrous city is not spared. I'm about to ring the buzzer. Deuteronomy 13 is a stern call for the Israelites to remain steadfast in their worship of God, warning against the influences of false prophets, dreams, and even loved ones that might tempt them toward idolatry. Through a series of strong directives, it underscores the profound significance of the loyalty to God and delineates the consequences of straying from Him. So God takes all this very serious, doesn't He? Beware of false prophets and dreamers. Daniel, do you have 13 verses, beginning in verse 1 through 5? Yeah.
If there arises among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and he gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder comes to pass, of which he spoke to you, saying, let us go after other gods, which you have not known, and let us serve them. You shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him, and keep his commandments and obey his voice. You shall serve him and be hold fast to him. But that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has spoken in order to turn you away from the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of bondage, to entice you from the way in which the Lord your God commanded you to walk. So you shall put away the evil from your midst.
Okay, so here's a pretty stern warning about dreamers. You know, our way of saying that would be false teachers, false prophets, things of that nature. Well, at this time, you know, the devil's influence was still pretty strong on people. And it's true, he could deceive whole nations. Well, what would mark what the dreamer or prophet is saying versus what is? If he dreams a dream and that dream is drawing you away from the Lord your God, what is he? False prophet. What do you do with him? Put him to death, okay? So, pretty stern warning about what God expects of him, that he wants the people strictly to cleave unto him and to keep really among the people as much purity as possible, wasn't it? Okay, so that's pretty much self-explanatory. If a prophet or dreamer of dreams appears among the Israelites and provides a sign and wonder that comes true, but that encourages them to follow other gods, they must not heed this individual. Such occurrences test the faithfulness of the people of God. The false prophet or dreamer should be put to death for trying to lead Israel away from God. Side note on that, I don't know if you've ever noticed what Paul said to the church at Thessalonica about the man of sin in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Have you ever noticed what he says here about when the falling away, that no man deceive you, so on and so forth, and all like that? Notice what he says here about that person. in verse 9. Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? You know, that the influence that these people can have looks pretty dramatic. Well, notice what he says that all this stuff was. It's lying wonders, isn't it? They're lying, okay? There's not any of that anymore. So how do they do it? They present it in a pretty picture, don't they? And we got to stop there and get ready for the Lord.